This is one of the most disturbing cases in American history, not because of how many people died, but because of what the killer did after. Police walked into a crime scene so horrific that even experienced detectives had to step outside just to breathe. There was blood everywhere, not just spilled but consumed. This wasn't just murder, it was something far darker, because the man responsible didn't believe he was a killer. He believed he was dying, and that drinking human blood was the only way to stay alive. This is the story of Richard Chase, the man the media would later call the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Chase was born in 1950 in California. At first glance, his life didn't seem unusual. There were no obvious signs that he would become one of the most disturbing killers in American history. But as he grew older, something began to change. He became withdrawn, quiet, isolated. Then came the paranoia. Chase became obsessed with his own body. He believed something inside him was going wrong. He claimed his heart would suddenly stop beating. He insisted his blood wasn't circulating the way it should. To him, this wasn't anxiety, it was real. Doctors would later recognize that he was suffering from severe mental illness, with symptoms consistent with schizophrenia. But at the time, treatment was inconsistent, and whatever help he received was never enough to stabilize him. His thoughts grew darker, more irrational, more dangerous. Then came the first truly disturbing shift. Chase began killing animals, not out of anger, not for any clear reason, but because he believed he needed them. He would drain their blood and drink it. Sometimes he mixed blood with animal organs, blending them into crude, horrifying concoctions that he believed would repair his failing body. To anyone else, it was madness. To Richard Chase, it was survival. By the mid-1970s, his grip on reality was almost completely gone. He was admitted to psychiatric hospitals multiple times. At one point, he was discovered injecting animal blood directly into his veins. Doctors knew something was seriously wrong. They knew he was unstable. But eventually, he was released. No long-term supervision, no real safeguard, just a man unraveling, set loose. He moved into an apartment in Sacramento, and that's when things began to escalate. Neighbors would later describe strange encounters. Chase wandering the streets late at night, talking to himself, knocking on doors without explanation, watching people in a way that made them uneasy. But there was one belief he held onto above all else. One rule that would define everything that came next. If a door was locked, it meant he wasn't welcome. But if a door was unlocked, that meant he had permission to enter. In December 1977, that belief turned deadly. A woman named Teresa Wallin was at home alone. She was pregnant. There were no signs of forced entry, because there didn't need to be. Her door was unlocked. Richard Chase simply walked inside. What happened next was brutal. He attacked her violently with no warning, no hesitation. But it didn't end there. After the murder, he mutilated her body. Then he drank her blood. When police arrived, the scene was almost impossible to process. This wasn't a typical crime. It wasn't driven by money, revenge, or even rage in the way most people understand it. It was something else entirely. Something deeply disturbing. Something that didn't make sense. And the worst part was that it didn't stop. Weeks later, another attack, then another. Homes were entered without force. Victims were chosen at random. There was no clear pattern, no warning signs anyone could follow. In one of the most horrifying incidents, an entire family was targeted inside their own home. Multiple victims, no chance to escape, no chance to understand what was happening. Sacramento was changing. Fear spread quickly. People began locking their doors at all hours. Windows were checked and rechecked. Neighbors warned each other. The sense of safety that once existed quietly disappeared. Because now, they understood something terrifying. This killer didn't break in. He simply walked in. And if your door was unlocked, you were already a target. Police were under immense pressure. They were dealing with something unlike anything they had seen before. The crime scenes were chaotic, disturbing, and difficult to interpret. But slowly, pieces began to come together. There were fingerprints, witness descriptions of a strange, erratic man. Patterns that didn't make sense at first, but eventually pointed in one direction. The name that surfaced was Richard Chase. When officers finally went to his apartment, they weren't prepared for what they would find. Inside was evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Blood, containers, remains. Signs of a man completely consumed by his delusions. It wasn't just the actions of a killer. It was the life of someone living inside a nightmare and bringing that nightmare into the real world. Richard Chase was arrested in 1978. During questioning, he didn't behave the way most criminals do. He didn't deny what he had done. He didn't try to hide it, because in his mind, he wasn't guilty. He believed he needed blood to survive. He believed his body was failing and that everything he had done was necessary. At trial, his defense argued that he was insane, that he didn't understand the reality of his actions. But the court found him guilty. He was sentenced to death. He would never reach execution. In 1980, inside his prison cell, Richard Chase died from an overdose of medication. Some believe it was suicide. Others believe it was simply the inevitable end of a man who had been lost long before he was ever arrested. Either way, the man known as the Vampire of Sacramento was gone. But the story didn't end with his death. Because what makes this case so disturbing isn't just the violence. It's the question it leaves behind. When someone is this far gone, is it pure evil, or is it something that was never stopped in time?